Those of you who are my age likely remember this game.
Pitch out, gets the block, tucks it away, running right, to the 40, down on the 48-yard line, a gain of 22 yards. It's first down.
This is Joe Montana Football 2, also known as Sports Talk Football on the Sega Genesis.
He's going to pass, puts it up, yes, nice job, brought down at the 39-yard line.
It's got that classic metallic computer voice doing play-by-play.
He puts it up, incomplete. That brings up 2nd and 10.
And honestly, this play-by-play is pretty good for a video game from 1991.
Back to pass, better hurry. Takes it outside, brought down at the 30.
It's a horizontal game, and it's actually really good. The big question, though, is whether this game was better than Madden 1992.
To the 30, 40, 50, brought down at the 48-yard line.
And the fun part is that there's actually something to compare this time around. Unlike the first version of Joe Montana Football on the Genesis, the second one was actually a different game than the EA Sports Football game. Back in 1989, Sega CEO Michael Katz wanted to start the new Genesis off with a bang, and so he signed a huge contract with football star Joe Montana for a series of games without having any games actually ready, of course. Now, this was not unusual at that time. In fact, there were a few very well-known video game producers that focused first on getting intellectual property rights and then on shipping out whatever garbage they could get as a game, and most of you already know about this by now. So, for example, LJN's Major League Baseball on the NES had the Major League Baseball license. Now, that game was absolutely horrible. LJN did the same thing a year later with the NFL, also on the NES. LJN's NFL game very well might be the worst football game of all time, which is a pretty impressive accomplishment. Similarly, Acclaim got the rights to make an NES game using the WWF logo. The result was WWF WrestleMania on the NES, which is another borderline unplayable game. But those games all sold very well. Why? Well, it's simple. Video game magazines back in the late 1980s and the very early 1990s didn't really review games, not the way that we think about reviewing games today. The ones that did have rating systems, which was a rare thing back then, could be bought off by the game manufacturers. Most publications didn't do anything but just show screenshots and repeat ad copy. And so the name of a big movie or a celebrity or a sports league or something like that was usually more than enough to get people to buy the game. Anyway, Sega had a contract with a company called Mediagenic to create the first Joe Montana football game for the Genesis. Now, Mediagenic was formerly called Activision, which is a name that you're probably familiar with. Sega's plan to defeat the juggernaut Nintendo was twofold. First, they rolled out the famous Genesis Does What Nintendo Don't ad campaign, and second, they made a line of sports games featuring the names and likenesses of celebrities: Pat Riley, Arnold Palmer, Buster Douglas, Tommy Lasorda, and Joe Montana, not to mention little guys like Michael Jackson. Of course, all of that cost money, so for example, Joe Montana cost $1.7 million up front, and remember that this is in 1989 dollars. Sega had somehow heard that Mediagenic had a football game that was about 30% finished, and so they signed a contract figuring that the game would be ready for the 1990 holiday season. And that was a mistake. Now, they could not have known that it was a mistake at the time. Activision had been a major company, a big player with Atari back in the early 1980s, and I'm sure that the company at least made things look good to get the contract. But when December rolled around, the game was just not making any progress at all. Their only choice was to scrap Joe Montana Football, which would have been a major hit to them, especially with that $1.7 million contract. But it just so happens that EA's John Madden Football was scheduled to come out at that same time. And so Sega contacted EA to ask for a favor. Joe Montana Football missed the Christmas 1990 season. This game didn't come out until January 1991. And the game looks and feels a lot like John Madden Football. It's a little bit less responsive. The playbook is a little bit smaller. However, it feels a little bit easier to pass in this game. It's also a slightly faster game than the first John Madden Football. But this must have been really confusing to customers. In fact, the most confusing thing is that the Sega Master System version of Joe Montana Football did come out in time for Christmas 1990, and that game is completely different from the Genesis version. It's not clear to me who made this game, though it clearly was not EA. You've got only 9 men to each side. And it's actually not a bad game. In fact, it's pretty fast for a Sega Master System game. Now, the play selection is kind of limited. However, you can call running plays and then pass instead. Sometimes this means you'll have a receiver wide open. Anyway, overall this is a pretty decent 8-bit football game. I mean, it's not Tecmo Super Bowl, sure, and we'll talk more about that one in a second, but Joe Montana Football on the Sega Master System is actually a forgotten classic in my opinion. It goes by quickly, it's easy to play, and I think it's a lot of fun. So Sega also came out with a Game Gear version of this, which I'm betting that most of you never played. This is literally the same game as the Sega Master System version. But that's not really a bad thing. The graphics look good for an early 1991 portable game. And once again, this is a lot of fun to play. You know, sometimes the best games are the simplest games. The problem, of course, is that you'd be lucky to get 4 hours of battery life out of the Game Gear. Now, you could get an AC adapter, but that kind of defeats the purpose of playing on a virtual system because you have to sit at home next to an outlet. And it took 6 AA batteries, which is more than the 4 AA batteries that the Game Boy took. But there are still some classics on the Game Gear, and Joe Montana Football absolutely is one of them. Anyway, once you've seen those games, stuff in Joe Montana Football 2 will make a little bit more sense. This was another horizontally scrolling game, which some of us actually prefer.
Touchdown. The score is San Francisco 8, New Orleans 2.
Over time, football games have gravitated towards that John Madden Football approach.
First down, Seahawks.
Now, one of the problems with Joe Montana Football 2 is that it can be hard to see downfield.
Puts it up. Yes, nice job. Yes.
Later games with the behind-the-back perspective were a little bit easier to see. Madden had these passing windows which are actually misleading. However, in my opinion, Tecmo Super Bowl does long passing the best. You can spot the coverage by watching the defensive backs, and you can find the open man quickly and easily. With Madden, you're kind of hoping that you guess right. And with Joe Montana 2, you're basically throwing up a prayer every single time.
Deep. No good. The score is 9-2.
Note that all 3 of these games came out back around Christmas 1991, so people then seem to care more about the graphics and sound than anything else. However, in retrospect, most people who play these games today care more about playability than the sound or the graphics, right? Because all that stuff's 30-something years old. That's the reason why we tend to side with Tecmo Super Bowl. Don't get me wrong, the announcer in Joe Montana Football 2 is really cool.
The pass caught by the receiver, who's hit as he gets to the 17. First down.
It can get a little bit annoying at times.
Montana looking, going deep. Incomplete.
However, it's a lot better than the empty static in Madden 1992. Tecmo Super Bowl's soundtrack feels more like an arcade football game to me. But I would never choose one of these games based on the sound alone.
Montana back to pass. He's sacked back at the 45-yard line. That brings up 4th and 20.
And the graphical differences between these games are pretty minor. Joe Montana Football 2 has this really cool feature where the play will zoom in for you. The nice thing is that the players will be in the right place when they zoom in. LJN's NFL on the NES tried to do the same thing, but it failed miserably. That game also would zoom out afterwards, which was really distracting. Now Madden doesn't zoom at all, which I guess makes its graphics look small. Tecmo Super Bowl doesn't zoom either, though you won't even notice it. That's because the gameplay is fast and furious. Now, there is one major advantage that Joe Montana 2 had over Madden 1992. That was league play. Madden 1992 lets you play a regular season game, but you choose both teams. There is a playoff mode, but there's really no season mode. Joe Montana Football 2 has the season mode complete with a schedule. Now the problem is that there's no battery save. You have to write down a password, which is pretty dumb. Once again, Tecmo Super Bowl is the clear winner with one of the most famous battery save features in all of video games. And the amount of stats that you can generate in that 8-bit Nintendo game really is amazing. And the other thing, the thing that's kind of hard to show you, is that Tecmo Super Bowl is a lot faster to play. So it takes me maybe 20 minutes to play a full game of Tecmo Super Bowl. Joe Montana Football 2 takes me about 40 minutes if I play a 20-minute long game. And Madden 1992 is more like 45 to 50 minutes on the 20-minute mode. Playing a full season would really be a major time investment. Now, since all three games came out at the same time, we can directly compare what the critics said. GamePro absolutely loved Joe Montana 2 and considered it one of the best games of all time. And then, in keeping with great inflation, GamePro gave the same outstanding rating to the Genesis version of John Madden 1992, making sure that kids were confused. The Super Nintendo version of John Madden Football almost got a perfect rating, which is ridiculous when you consider just how much that game lags. I mean, just look at it. This game is unplayable. And finally, there was Tecmo Super Bowl. The big criticism here was for the graphics, which makes me think that the writers forgot that this was an NES game. Anyway, you be the judge. I think that Tecmo Super Bowl got the shaft. And I think we can all agree that Tecmo Super Bowl was the best football game in Christmas 1991. I mean, think of it this way. Nobody really plays Madden 1992 anymore. Nobody really plays Joe Montana Football 2 anymore, except me, I guess. But there are a ton of us who still play Tecmo Super Bowl regularly. That brings up the big question, though. Was Joe Montana Football 2 better than Madden 1992? In my opinion, it was. I really like the horizontal point of view, even if I can't always see my receivers. Now, there are a few issues. For example, the receiver selection icon doesn't always come up right.
Incomplete. Good play by the defense. New Orleans takes possession on the 32-yard line.
Defense is also pretty overpowered.
Pitch out to the back. Good blocking. Tackled immediately.
And it's missing that ambulance meme that Madden 1992 had. But it's still a solid game.
Montana back to throw. Throws going deep. Intercepted at the 46.
Madden has more plays and more play variety. However, it feels a little bit more sluggish, and the play control is a little bit slippery. Plus, the sounds in Madden just aren't quite as good.
Touchdown.
As annoying as the robotic voice is, it really is impressive for 1991.
Takes it outside. He's jumped at the 43. San Francisco has it at the 43.
Anyway, there you have it. So if you want to relive December 1991, I say first play Tecmo Super Bowl. And then, if you insist on playing a Genesis football game, I would give the nod to Joe Montana Football 2 over Madden 1992. But you might disagree. If you disagree, let me know down below in the comments.